My name is Carol McGrew. This will be Unit 4, hearing for the We the People National Finals. In a moment, I will have the judges introduce themselves, followed by the students, and then we will begin the hearing. Students will deliver a 4-minute prepared statement, followed by 8 minutes of judges' questions. My microphone will be muted during the hearing, and I will be holding up the 1 minute and the time is up signs. I suggest you use gallery view rather than speaker view. At the conclusion of the hearing, judges will give brief feedback to teams, and then we will conclude. So now the judges will introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zach Eastburn. I am an attorney here in Madison, Wisconsin.
Congratulations to you. My name is Tom Tinder, and I am an attorney in Charleston, West Virginia.
I'm Robert Diane. I teach American government at the University of Evansville in Indiana.
And feel free to introduce yourselves. And your
Hi, I'm Emma Redman. I am a junior here at Meridian Medical.
I am Madison Healy, and I am also a junior here at Meridian Medical.
My name is Addie Barker, and I'm a junior as well.
Logan Jolett, and I'm also a junior.
Thank you. So today we will be doing question 1 with Unit 4, and I will read the question, and then you guys will be free to give us your opening statement. Question 1 says, it would be inconsistent with the constitutional separation of the executive and legislative powers to let the prerogative pardon power be exercised by the latter. What were the framers' reasons for giving the president the pardon power, and do you agree or disagree with them? Relatedly, according to the framer James Wilson, if the president abuses the power, how can he be impeached and prosecuted? Do you agree with Wilson? Why or why not? And then, in your opinion, what constitutes high crimes and misdemeanors? You may begin.
The framers' reason for giving the president pardon power is derived from the very governmental body the colonists declared independence from. Michael Klarman, a Harvard law professor, explains that the king had the pardon power, leading the framers to presume that the president would have that same power. The pardon power allows the president to check the power of the judicial branch on a federal level. If someone is sentenced too harshly, the president can act as a buffer to ensure fair treatment. With that being said, we do not agree with the framers' stance in the question. We have yet to put the theory and ideals of pardoning at the forefront of its usage. There have been countless instances that have proven how the pardon power has been used as a tool for political gain rather than to check the power of the judicial branch. Additionally, the mere amount of people who are petitioning for a lower sentence or none at all can be attributed to the problems within the judicial branch, which we've seen in cases including excessive sentencing for nonviolent drug crimes and other low-level offenses, the large amount of pretrial detainees, and wrongful convictions. If we truly want to fulfill the purpose that the pardon power sets out, we would need to either address the problems from within the judicial branch or rethink the current applications of the pardon power. As James Madison explains, quote, justice is the end of government. It is the end of civil society. It has ever been and ever will be pursued until it is obtained or until liberty is lost in the pursuit.
We agree with James Wilson's statement. He can be impeached and prosecuted in theory, but not in practice. When creating Section 2, Clause 1 of the Constitutions, framers had not envisioned the leaders we have today, and political parties had yet to be created, so party ideology was not taken into consideration. Now that members of Congress have become almost as loyal to their party as they are to their country, no single party Senate will impeach their leader. During the presidencies of Obama and Trump administrations, a total of 355 pardons were given. The pardons given their times in office were not considered unconstitutional. However, certain pardons may have been given as rewards to certain people or as a political or personal gain for the president.
Some examples are the pardoning of Oscar Lopez Rivera by President Barack Obama. This pardon created an unavoidable game of identity politics and gained Obama a substantial amount of votes in a key voting bloc for the Democratic Party. And Roger Stone, who was pardoned by President Trump, who gave a false testimony to come between the Trump campaign and WikiLeaks. After President Trump's decision to pardon Stone, Nancy Pelosi called for legislation stating, Congress will take action to prevent this type of brazen wrongdoing. Legislation is needed to ensure that no president can pardon or commute the sentence of an individual who is engaged in a cover-up campaign to shield that president of criminal prosecution. However, because of who controlled Congress, the legislation didn't pass. We believe that the framers had the right idea that presidents can be impeached and prosecuted for their wrongdoings, but have doubts that Congress will ever rule on that.
High crimes and misdemeanors were the framers' attempt to define the president's actions that purposely harm the country, act according to the will of another state, or use the office of the president for their personal gain. Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution lists impeachable offenses as conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Given the context, this definition is not that nebulous, and the president would be held accountable for their actions. This is not held up practically. Of the 4 impeachments that have occurred in our nation's history, none resulted in conviction. This is indicative of a flawed system where our chief executive can get away with high crimes and misdemeanors while still retaining power. The ideas which have been clearly stated by the framers of the Constitution have never held up realistically and may never actually protect our nation. This disconnect between theory and practice has even put the lives of Congress members in danger, as we saw on January 6th. The desire of the president and their party to retain power has nullified this concept of high crimes and misdemeanors every single time it has come into question. Overall, this listing of impeachable offenses in the Constitution should make it fairly clear when impeachment and conviction is necessary, but we have not once seen the part of our Constitution meant to protect us from sabotage or infiltration actually come into play.
All right, thank you, everyone. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of limiting the presidential pardon or checking it. I think someone mentioned maybe that there would be legislation limiting the presidential pardon. Can you explain what you mean by that, and then maybe also the process about how that would go about?
Well, so when I mentioned legislation after President Trump pardoned Roger Stone, Nancy Pelosi decided that legislation needed to be put in place because she believed that this was an abuse of the pardon power because his pardon was now getting involved in a criminal investigation. And so with that, that legislation was trying to be put in place to limit that. But unfortunately, as we saw, that legislation wasn't enacted on, it wasn't put into place because of who controlled the House. And I think if we were ever to try and put legislation into act in order to limit this presidential pardon power, we would always have this ongoing issue of not putting it into play because of the party that controls Congress.
Going on to impeachment, what type of legislation do you think could be introduced or should be introduced to deal with impeachment? We've had, as you said, 4 presidents impeached. None of them have been convicted. How can we make the impeachment process more effective? And I'm not saying whether it could ever be done, but what would, in your opinion, be some process or some procedures or some definitions of impeachment that would violate the law and be open for action?
I think that one of the main things that we can do and should do is to make these hearings secret and closed off from the public until afterwards, because we see a lot of these representatives voting strictly on party lines, and then the people who don't vote on party lines are getting heavily scrutinized. I mean, we saw with Mitt Romney in the recent impeachment of President Trump. He was heavily scrutinized. He was followed around in an airport. So if we make these hearings secret, I feel like we would have more representatives voting on based on morality and if the president has actually violated the law.
I think another way that we could make the act of conviction easier, because obviously we've been able to impeach presidents, but none of them have actually been removed from office, would be to make it a majority vote versus a 2/3 vote, because we don't really ever see one party having 2/3 of the Senate controlled. So if we could make that a majority vote, that would make it a lot easier for presidents to be convicted after they've been impeached.
Thank you.
Back in Philadelphia, when they were writing the Constitution, one of the ideas was that maybe the pardon power should be shared with the legislative branch in the same way that other powers are shared with the legislative branch. If you have any thoughts about whether that might be a good move at a time like this? Would that make the pardon power less dangerous?
I feel like giving the pardon power to the legislative branch would have some benefits because it's more directly tied to the people. The legislative branch, I mean, people are elected and voted in based on their constituents. And so if we gave the legislative branch the pardon power, I feel like it'd be used more morally, I guess, and based more on what the people think should be changed in the legislative branch. So in places where they think that we should have marijuana legalized, we might have more people being pardoned for those lower level drug crimes. So yeah, I think that it's definitely something to think about if you want to have more of American people in the pardon power process.
And something that I think might be a good idea, even though it might be inefficient, is like the president having to get their pardons confirmed by the Senate or the House, which I think could prevent a lot of the pardons we've seen where presidents have had like hundreds of pardons, and it would prevent some of this circumvention of the legal system.
Do you guys see any downsides in involving the legislature in the pardon process or giving them that power?
One downside that I could see with it is the amount of time that it would take because of how long the legislative process can take having to get through Congress. I think that having to make a pardon go through Congress could take possibly too long to get a pardon done. So I think time would be a major constraint on that.
I also agree with what Addie was saying, and just bringing back in what Emma was saying. We see in a lot of presidents' final hours, they are pardoning as many people as they can on those lower offenses. Most of those are those lower level drug crime offenses. And so if we are bringing the legislative branch into this, and now they are, all of our pardons have to go through the legislative branch, a lot of those people wouldn't be pardoned in those final hours. And a majority of those people aren't being pardoned unconstitutionally or for unmoral reasons.
Do you believe that the impeachment process is the way that the founding fathers thought it would be or set it up to be? Act like you're a member, like you were one of the founding fathers or mothers. And do you think that it's turned out the way they proposed it?
Well,
That's okay.
I feel like just bringing back in like what Emma said, I feel like they hadn't envisioned our like political like differences to become as drastic as they are now. I don't think that they had envisioned this two-party system where there would be so much divide within the system. And so when we were going in to impeach a president, I don't think that they had envisioned that there would be so much controversy and conflict between the sides, as they didn't have party ideology yet. So they weren't entirely sure how like that was going to play out, and they couldn't have envisioned that it would be like this in the future. So I don't think that they had any idea that, or I don't think they envisioned this to be how impeachment would go, especially as we've seen with President Trump and Bill Clinton in the past.
I want to ask a question about this party business, because we've had parties for 200 plus years and we've had pardons for 200 plus years. So why is it that you think it's currently especially bad? What makes it different? And you have 5 seconds to answer.
I think it's just because like right now we're probably the most divided that we've ever been as a country. And when we were going back all the way to when George Washington was still president, when he did his farewell, he was warning people not to become split politically. And so at that point in time, we weren't worried about these two major parties until, you know, we had the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans come in and kind of split the legislation or the government kind of up. So they weren't really envisioning that big of a divide.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. You did a great job. You guys can take a breath. So we're going to give you some feedback now. And I just want to start by saying what I really liked about your presentation, especially when I look at think about the question and answer, is, you know, we asked some questions, and I think, let me just back up and preface this by saying sometimes with this, you know, it's easy to get lost in the theory and the history and the, you know, making sure we have a lot of examples. All that stuff is important, and I think everyone here will agree with that. But what you guys did was you gave all that, but you also gave some pretty practical solutions to some of the questions we asked. So I think, you know, when we talked about impeachment, I think one of the questions was, well, how do we make that more effective, or something like this? And you guys were like, well, here's two things. We could make the hearing secret. It could ensure political cover for some of these senators like Romney, who otherwise were like, I don't know what I want to do here, or majority vote instead of 2/3 vote. All these things that, you know, they're not right or wrong answers. You know, some of us might really agree with them, or some of us might not agree with them, but you guys gave them, and it was important to do that. And it was a distinguishing thing for you guys. You also, you got here eventually, where, you know, we were talking about the legislature being involved in the pardon. You know, I think initially everyone was like, oh yeah, you know, here, this is a good idea. But then, you know, what I wanted to see was, well, here's why it would not be so good of an idea. And so that's why I asked that question. You guys did then provide sort of the both sides of that. So we got there. It would be, you know, if you guys, if, you know, I would like to see more of that point counterpoint type thing with the with the presentation. But overall, you started off with, again, the origin of the pardon power from the king, and it being a check on the judiciary. And it kind of, I could tell you guys are focused on the sort of this being used inappropriately. There was a clear position right away, and that what was important to you guys was, hey, look, you know, there are all these people in this really flawed criminal justice system that are suffering from nonviolent drug offenses or whatever else, and we're over here pardoning all of our cronies for whatever. And that, I mean, you guys said it much more academically and nuanced than that, but it was really appreciated. So thank you.
I just have 2 or 3 comments to add on to what Zach said. I really enjoyed in your opening presentation some quotes that you provided, and the quotes illustrated the points that you were making very well, and I commend you on that. You also, there is no question, underlying what Zach said, there's no question that you all have thought about this stuff. I mean, you have, you know, you've read it and you've researched it, but then you've also thought about it, and you've come up with some ideas and some opinions about what ought to be done or not done, or whatever, to improve the system. And that's what this We the People program is all about, is what are your opinions? What do you think about this issue or that issue? And what do you think ought to be done, or what do you think should not be done? And you really have a great depth of knowledge on that. I just want to commend you on that, and you were well spoken, and you answered our questions and gave us some information and some answers that we haven't received so far. I must tell you, when you tell me that you're juniors in high school, I mean, that's inspiring, that you have the knowledge and the understanding at that young of age, and have the leadership abilities and qualities. Please don't let this be a classroom activity and you're on to something else next week or next semester or whatever. Please stay involved and continue to participate and demonstrate your leadership skills. Well done. Thank you.
I agree. I noticed when you said you were juniors, and I thought, my goodness, these are people who could walk right into a college classroom and fit right in and not skip a beat. I know you need to have a senior year, so I'm not trying to talk you out of it, but my goodness, you're already hitting it at a high level. My colleague said that you were very clear in your organization. I would say that you were bold. I mean, you took a position and stated it more boldly than most of the teams we're hearing. And you made a really strong juxtaposition between the intention of mercy and the politicization, and you really nailed that. And you said the remedies that the founders gave us sound terrific in theory, but let's walk through what's actually happened. and it's not working the way it's supposed to. And as Zach said during the Q&A, you raised thoughtful possibilities for how to correct that. So I thought that was all quite good. If I were to offer one modest criticism, some students are so excited to be at the nationals and they're chomping at the bit that they'll jump down a judge's throat with a response before the question is done. And then there's others that will linger, maybe on the verge of being too long before answering. And you weren't guilty of the former. And you weren't exactly guilty of the latter, but if the pauses had been any longer, I would have had to check to see if my screen was frozen. But there's no harm in deliberation. I think reflecting before you jump in is something to be celebrated. And in this world of Twitter and whatnot, and everybody wants instant gratification, that's not the best way to think about a tough question. So I'm not knocking you. I'm just saying that there were a couple times where I was wondering if an answer was forthcoming. But hats off to you guys. You did a terrific job.